Now here's a cool way to get a custom bokeh light effect here inside Photoshop. Now if you don't know, bokeh lights are those kind of the lights you see in the far background of an image. It has a lot of depth of field where the lights are really blurred out of focus, and you usually see it in romantic or very classy type of situations, but that's what those are. It's called bokeh lights. And looking at them really closely, I pretty much figured out that, you could create that effect just as easily with a brush, so you can add a little bit more to a photo. For instance, this one right here could stand with the addition of a few bokeh lights in here. So here's how you're going to go about doing it. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer for us to create our elements on. And we're going to go and grab the brush tool. And let's get a good size brush. Actually, we'll go up to about 80. And we're going to go in here into the menu here. And here in the hardness setting, we're going to drop that to about 75. So it has just a subtle, soft edge on it right there. Let's actually paint and see what we've got there. We've got some features turned on here. I don't need pressure sensitivity turned on. So there I'm just getting a dot with a relatively soft edge on it. So I got the brush selected. Let's open up the brush options here. And let's have a look at what we've got. Well, the first thing is, when we go into the shape dynamics, I want these to actually change size as I'm painting. So I'm going to take the size jitter up to 100%, all just like that. And then I'm going to turn off pen pressure. I do not want it to respond to the pressure sensitivity of my tablet here. But it is going to change the size as I paint, as you can see right there. I'm going to go into activate scattering, and let's really scatter these out quite a bit now. And I'm going to go into the brush tip shape and increase the spacing, because I don't really need them that much spacing. I mean, I don't need them that clumped up together. Now notice some of these are very, very tiny, and if I was to paint some now, you can see that there's very, very tiny ones in there. I don't necessarily want them to go that small when it's varying the size like that. So I'm going to go into that shape dynamics and just push the minimum diameter up to around 25-30%. That way they don't go too small. There they go. Next thing is, we're going to go in here and apply a texture to this. So I'm going to turn on the texture setting, and then go inside here and just select any of these textures. In fact, the ones I've got here are the rock patterns. And if you go ahead and select this one right here, which is the last one of the set, you just hover over it, you can see what's going to come up with the name here. It's just dirt. And notice what I've got. I've got the scaling actually dropped down. We'll have to drop that to about 75%. And the depth, I'm going to go ahead and leave at 50 for now. But again, this is a brush. We can change this at any time. So let's just kind of brush and see what we've gotten. Because what I did notice when you look at most bokeh lights is that they have a little bit of a texture in them. They're picking up the texture of whatever the light's shining through. And, it kind of has that kind of a cool effect on it as well. So we've got the texture, we've got the scattering, everything looks good. But now I'm going to go over here and add another element to this, which is the transfer setting. And I want it to do an opacity jitter. And I don't want it to respond to any pressure sensitivity, but I am going to set the opacity jitter to 50. So now if I paint a little bit now, you can see I'm getting some varying densities of these. And they're looking pretty good. Let's actually bump up the size a little bit. So we're getting some pretty interesting things. If they overlap, they tend to shine through each other, and that's giving me a very interesting kind of bokeh light effect. Let's actually kind of soften that edge up a little bit more. I'm going to bring that down to about 65. And there we go. All right. So that is pretty much it. That's pretty much our bokeh brush. We've got all these elements in place, and everything looks pretty good. And we could go in here and choose maybe a softer yellow light for the background and just go in here and paint some bokeh lights in our background. Now, of course, if they overshoot into our subject, we can just go in here and erase that particular element out. But look at that. We've got pretty realistic bokeh lights in no time at all, just building a custom brush. Now, there's another option you can go for if you didn't necessarily want there to be a single colored light, which you could certainly choose any color. You could go in here on that. So let's actually create a new layer because I like the way the bokeh lights look on that layer. But keeping it that same yellow, but if you jump in here into the brush options for the brush, let's select the brush there. There's our brush actually. And you know what? Here's a good tip. If you go through the labors of creating a bokeh brush like this, it's probably a good idea to save the brush. And don't just save the brush. If you go in here and save new brush preset, it's not going to save every setting. You're going to want to go in here into this icon at the very front, or the very first icon in the options bar, and choose new tool preset. That will not only save the brush tip, but it will also save all the settings you've got applied to it, which are all the transfer, texture, all these elements that are turned on and being used will be saved in that brush. So it's a good idea to save it. But back to what we were talking about, that we've got it set up to paint straight bokeh lights, but if you add color dynamics and then have the hue jitter here set all the way to 100, and as long as you start with a base color and start to paint, you'll get multicolored bokeh lights. So it can be like she's at a party, or she's outside, downtown, partying. Not only that, let's undo that. If you make the softness even more so, if we drop the hardness down even more, making it a softer edge, they'll get that much more out of focus and appear to be that much more in the distance. Just by changing the softness of the brush will give the appearance of changing the focus of the lights. Notice how they're considerably softer and further in the background. So, with just a few simple settings and a few custom brush, a few simple settings on a custom brush, you can have very realistic bokeh lights that you can apply pretty much any time. Now, another light element I want to talk about is something else that I've done in a couple of tutorials in the past, and that is another type of brush built from a lens flare. And what we're going to do in this case is, I have this image here that I want to be able to apply this effect to. I need to make some adjustments here first. Let's actually go into the channels and load the luminosity as a selection. I'm just going to Command or Control click right on the RGB channel and go back into the image here, and let's do a levels adjustment. So I can see I created a levels adjustment layer based on that luminosity. And what I want to do is actually darken the background. So I'm just going to invert that mask. And notice we're selected on the layer mask. So go under Image Adjustments, Invert. And let's actually go ahead and make an adjustment. So I'm pushing the dark areas to make that background a little bit darker. Or a lot darker, rather. But notice other areas inside aren't being as affected as much. If I actually shift click on that, you can see it. There's the mask off, revealing all the changes, and then there's the masking it, making it that much more, working that much better. So actually, let's darken that. There we go. Little levels adjustment layer on there. So, made it considerably darker. Now let's go and add our other elements. So I have a new blank layer. I'm just going to go ahead and fill that layer with black by pressing Shift-Delete, and let's choose black, normal, okay. Going to go into the filter menu and go to Render and choose Lens Flare. And I'm going to use a lens flare I said I probably never use ever, but I am going to use it this time because it's kind of got an interesting result. But notice you can click and move around the target area around this, but I'm going to try and get this all grouped together as one for this Movie Prime lens flare that we're going to apply. So we'll click OK, and there it gives me that interesting effect there. Now, actually our images, let's undo that. Just to make it easier, let's not do this inside of our working file. I try and build elements outside of the document. So let's do this. Let's go and create a new document. We'll make it 6x6 at 150. Fill the background with black, and let's go ahead and run that same lens flare. And there it is. It's showing us a little bit more detail and everything like that. So we're in a separate document. And what we're going to do with this lens flare now is turn it into a custom brush. But before we do that, we have to set it up for that. First thing is, I need to remove the color information on this. Let's go to Image, Adjustments, and Desaturate. Then I can see I've got a couple of these lines that are going right to the edge here. So let's just kind of brush in some black. Let's actually grab a brush here. Still got our bokeh brush on here. Let's select a different one. Take care of those edges there so we're not getting in a harsh edge. Let's get a softer edge there. There we go. So, now I want to define this as a brush. And if you remember, when you define a brush in Photoshop, it's going to turn whatever is black into the most opaque or dense part of your brush. Anything white will be transparent. So right now we're looking at the opposite. We actually need to invert this before we define this as a brush. So again, under image adjustments, invert, and there we are. It's a good idea to maybe just, force white the rest of the background, because you never know, there's a little bit of hint of gray in there that could become part of your brush. You don't necessarily want it, so it's just good to make sure that that's really being pushed to white. Now we're ready to define the brush. So we can go under the Edit menu, go down here to Define Brush Preset. You can give it a name if you like, doesn't matter. And now we've got our brush. So let's jump back over here to our document. Create a new blank layer. I'm just going to go over here and grab that brush tool, and then go up inside of the menu, and it should be the very last brush that's been applied to the menu here. It's the very last one. There it is. And if we see with white, there is our flare brush. So the brush is defined, and we're back inside our image. So we can go ahead and close this image here, and now we're back working inside our original file. There we go. So what I'm going to do is just set 1 here on this layer. Notice it's on a blank layer. I'm just going to paint 1 here because I'm going to add a light effect to this. I'm just going to double click on this and add an outer glow. And let's give it, now we can give it a color if we like. That's fine. Give it kind of a blue color there. There we go. So there is a layer style applied to my lens flare brush. Now, so the layer style is in place. Let's go and change the behavior of the brush now. If we open up the brush options once again, and we go in here and activate shape dynamics, we can have the size jittering, which is good. We'll actually drop this down to 25. Angle roundness is fine. I'm going to go ahead and activate scattering, so it gives me a lot of scattering. As you notice, when I move the slider here, the scattering really goes crazy. Don't want to do too much in there. Let's just kind of do it right about there. But we are going to increase the spacing. So if we go in brush tip shape and increase that spacing out, there we go. So now, again, we're on that layer that contains that layer style. As I paint these elements in, let's increase that brush size quite a bit. As I paint these elements in, it's varying the size and picking up that layer style, ultimately giving me a cool kind of light flash effect. If you don't want to use the scattering, which I don't, it's actually kind of scattering in a weird way. You can just add the elements individually, and even with the size jitter set to 100, even if you just click once, each and every time you're going to get a different size. So you can be very accurate in where you want to place certain light effects, but you can see how some of the lights, let's actually get one by our face here, and other things like that. So you can add these cool bursts that are created from a lens flare. So a lens flare isn't just something you can apply directly to an image. You can also turn it into a brush and get very creative with the placement and layer styles and all cool things like that. And of course, going back to the bokeh light. So this just gives you a couple of options in adding photographic light effects to your images right from scratch right here inside Photoshop.